Hello, this is the Epic Atheist, and
Chris McLaughlin. Wait. How come I don't get a cool name?
because I have a YouTube channel with that name. If you
Damn it!
want to call yourself-
I want a cool name. How about a Tonto? Okay, the Epic
Okay.
Atheist and Tonto. That's what I'll be now.
Okay. So it's the Epic Atheist and
Tonto.
okay, yes. Didn't know you were part Indian.
Hey, that's racist.
Well, I'm an atheist. I think that goes to the territory. But that's later on in the show. So we have three topics today. Our first one is going to be unintelligent design. Because we all know the world is intelligently designed, right?
Well, yeah. Just look around you.
So, let's begin this with, when somebody says the world is intelligently designed, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Like, what do you say to them to refute that point?
Well, okay. The whole idea of the universe, the world, human beings, whatever, being intelligently designed, just never. I never had any traction. It never had any traction in my head. I don't understand it. I never looked at the world. I was never indoctrinated into a religion, so I just don't see the world like that. I see the world. I look at it from a standpoint of curiosity, right? The thought never entered my head that there even could have been some sort of designer. So, I mean, I guess I'm kind of a freak like that, right?
Well, you're lucky.
Okay.
Because I'll tell you right now, the journey into atheism for some people is not very pleasant.
So what is it like to assume that the world is designed? I mean, what does that feel like? What is that like when you to go through life thinking that? What does that even? I don't
Well,
even
it
get it.
depends because I went through two different things. One was a batshit crazy religion I made up for myself, and one was Christianity. And when I was a Christian, it was just the norm. It was basically like, I have 5 fingers. It was just normal. It didn't feel any different. It just felt normal. It was like, yeah, of course everything is intelligent design. I wasn't really a debater back then. I didn't really know any of the arguments. I wasn't a good Christian ever. Like, when people say that you weren't a true Christian to certain people, you've heard that argument, right?
Well, yeah, the no true Christian. Anybody who doesn't believe in Christianity the way you do is not a true Christian.
And I'm one of those people that, I'll agree with you. I was never a true Christian. I was a Christian for the same reason I believed in Santa Claus. My parents are authority figures, and I trusted my parents. The second I started to even question it, I got rid of it soon after. So we are kind of in similar boats in that I didn't really have an adult idea of it. I didn't really have a mature concept of intelligent design. The closest I've ever had was I felt that aliens, cosmic aliens designed the planet to test us. And the point of it is that their plans were meant to be flawed. They were meant to be the way it is. And so that's the closest sense I've had to an adult concept of intelligent design. So
in other words, you just sort of made it up,
Yeah, I think my brain made it up to give me basically how I see it is that it's kind of like drugs. I couldn't get off the concept of God, not Christianity, the concept of God cold turkey, because everyone around me believed in God, and I had no framework of there is no God. That just didn't enter my mind. And so this was kind of a weaning path. Well, these are cosmic beings. They can create worlds and do things that are godlike, but they're not technically gods. They were created. They can die. but they're still. But if we were to meet them today, if like one of them came down, and we actually met them, well, we would think they were God. So it's kind of like an in-between stage, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, it sounds like it's just the opposite, right? I mean, you just never considered that that the universe couldn't have been designed, and I couldn't understand why someone would think that it is designed. You know, and people, you know, again, that was sort of, you know, growing up, people would say things, but we never talked about, you know, a grand designer of the universe, and so I never really thought about it much. It wasn't until I became an active atheist and I started reading, you know, the writings of atheists responding to these things, responding to these ideas, that I sort of started to consider the idea of, you know, what if the universe were designed? What would it look like? What would a designed universe be like?
Yeah.
Maybe we're in one.
I'm going to give you a secret that I shouldn't be telling you. Christians also don't talk about that kind of stuff in their normal lives.
Okay. I believe you. I mean, nobody, you know, most people are apatheists. You know, they just don't care about these issues. They don't. It doesn't bother them in their life or whatever. In fact, it's only when, you know, that they have like presuppositions that they've just gone unchallenged in their own mind. They've gone unconsidered in their own mind. That they, you know, when they start getting challenged by something, then it starts to, like, you know, eat away at them because they've lived this comfortable life thinking. You know, to me, you know, looking at people who are God believers, they seem to have this sort of patchwork of God belief where all these different things fit together. And, you know, once one of those pieces of the patchwork gets, you know, removed, then there's this gaping hole, right? And it makes the rest of the structure of their God belief sort of weaker. They don't really, you know, it's just this uncomfortable hole right there. And you know, some people say that atheists have a God-shaped hole in their heart, but I mean, you know, theists really are the ones who have these sort of these atheist holes in their heart, because, you know, the more they learn about the universe, how it really isn't the way that their religion teaches them it is, the more of this empty space they have that's very uncomfortable. It's got to be very, very uncomfortable. But you know, I wanted to mention that the whole idea of intelligent or unintelligent design, you know, it's all based on sort of this assumption of perfection. Okay? There has to be at the core of this whole thing. I mean, I'm sure that, you know, if theists, if young people who are theists were like me when I was young, you know, we would sit in quiet moments and think to ourselves about these things and sort of try to logic some things out maybe for ourselves. And one of the things I can just imagine that the theists must do is that they think about this. They think about, you know, if there is a God, then that God created everything, and the God itself, one of the properties of a God that most theists believe a God has, is perfection. And a perfect God must therefore create a perfect universe. And how could a perfect God make a mistake, right? Create an imperfection.
It comes back to the argument that I hear all the time, and I was actually talking to somebody about this topic, and I was explaining to him about evolution. He completely doesn't believe in it, and I was explaining to him, and he was basically contributing it all to sin. And basically saying the reason why we find these fossils that don't look quite human is because of sin.
Okay, but, I mean, that is the most naive thing that a theist could possibly say, right? Because they're then turning around and ignoring the fact that God created the universe and everything. Everything that is not God that exists was created by God. And that must include, therefore, sin and whatever else, suffering, and, you know, all the other things that we might consider imperfections. But, going on with the whole perfection thing, though, I can just imagine, again, the thoughtful theist who is reflecting on this idea of a perfect being creating, everything in the universe, and yet, here we are as human beings, obviously not perfect beings. In some ways God-like, but certainly not gods ourselves.
Well, it begs the question of what is perfection. Like, what scale are we?
Yeah, something could be perfectly evil, right? Again, I don't want to get into the too philosophical discussion here, because we'll just go down the rabbit hole at that point. But the thing that strikes me is the whole idea, especially in Christianity, that this perfect God created the universe and human beings in His image. We're supposed to be God-like, and yet we are so obviously flawed in certain senses. And the sense that religion mostly picks up on is that we're morally flawed, that we choose to do things sometimes that aren't the right thing to do. Children do it every day, right? Because, well, they just don't know any better. They're going on instinct, right? And it takes, society and family and friends and all these things to sort of teach people right from wrong. But even as adults, prisons are filled with people who cheat other people, who hurt other people for no good reason, right? And so it comes down to this whole idea that sort of the whole idea of intelligent design is based on an idea of perfection that casts human beings in an imperfect light, and so therefore, we're flawed and we're just these terrible creatures, right? And it creates this sort of guilt. And in the case of Christianity, even thinking about doing something wrong is sinful, right? It's bad. And so you are trapped in this cycle of just being guilty all the time, of not being perfect, and it sets up an unrealistic standard for us. Whereas the more atheistic perspective is that the universe is what it is, right? Sort of an existential way of looking at things. The universe came into being somehow. We don't know exactly how, but we assume that it was a natural process, because every time we've ever investigated anything about how the universe works, it turns out there's a natural process behind it. There's no intelligence, right? There's no beings, there's no gods, there's no aliens that are creating universes in test tubes. It's just other natural processes. And so, the reasonable assumption is that, the conservative assumption is that, well, that's probably the case of the universe. But if that's the case, then that means that our existence was not preordained by any kind of perfection. We sort of are what we are, and we owe for our immediate situation to our ancestors. The other apes that were our ancestors. And so we find ourselves not being perfectly moral and not making the best decisions all the time, because we just, that's just the situation we're in. That's what we should expect. And there's nothing bad, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, all we can do is try to be better at what we do. We can't really do that. So, and there's nothing to be shameful about, right? What's the shame in existing? There is no shame. There is a shame if you're a created being, created by a perfect being that has expectations for you. But really, we're just natural beings in a natural universe, and there's no shame in that. And so I think it's more healthy maybe to have the atheist perspective.
No, I completely, I pretty much completely agree, and I look upon things like how we came to be and all that, and the fact that at one time my ancestors were single-cell organisms, and they survived, and they went, and they had to struggle. Nobody said magical words, and my ancestors were poof on this world in their current form. No, it took survival, and it could have been 100 different ways. I mean, the beauty thing about the theory of evolution is, and we are not the peak of evolution. Anybody who's watching this video, that's completely untrue.
Well, obviously, starfish are at the peak of evolution because, I mean, if they lose a limb, they can grow it right back.
Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're saying, the peak of evolution, because, like, it's the idea is that dolphins or cats or any other animal could have been what we are now if circumstances had been different. If it had allowed for them to evolve in such a way where increased brain potential is important for their survival. Like, that's the one thing we're good at, is that we have brains that can do things that other animals can't do. Even our closest relatives, our brains can perceive things that we've experimented that chimpanzees can't. Chimpanzees are very close to us in many ways, but there are a few tiny differences that make it that make us different.
I don't think they're tiny differences. I mean...
Well, I mean in the brain. I'm talking about in the brain. Like, they can do a lot of the similar things we can do.
Yeah, I wouldn't quantify it. I mean, they're different. Maybe slightly different? I don't know. I don't know how you'd phrase that.
They're not vastly different. Like apes...
Yeah.
Apes, not apes. I hate using that word because we are apes. Okay?
Right. Other apes. How about that?
Yeah. But chimpanzees can use tools. They can recognize things on television and things like that. They have similarity to us in how their brains work, but they live in a different society. How their norms are different from ours. So, I mean,
they have their own moral structure. Yeah, I mean, we know a lot about chimpanzees and other primates. I mean, yeah, it's hard to deny the similarities. I mean, even if you don't buy evolution, you still have to admit that these other animals are very similar to us in a lot of different ways. They have a lot of the same characteristics, you know. Both morally and socially, and and physically.
Yeah, but what I like to bring up a lot are dolphins, because recent studies, and I don't know how recent this is, actually found out that dolphins actually communicate with each other on a level that is similar to a language, to where they have names and all that. And when you first hear that, that's like what? But it's not as surprising, because it's not that surprising, but it's very interesting, and it shows that we're not as unique as we think we are.
Yeah.
I mean, we think we are unique because we can talk. Well, they can technically talk to each other. They might not be able to say, "Hey, Bob, what are you doing? You going to see a movie next week?"
Yeah.
But, and for all we know, they can. Like, obviously, as we study dolphins more, we're going to find out more about their hierarchy and how it works. And things like this are fascinating.
Yeah.
And it shows us that we're not unique, and that's what fascinates me, is that we're not as unique as people think we are.
So bringing it back around, I mean, bringing it back, sort of full circle, like, okay, so we've got these fundamental ideas, right, that lead people to either, to look at the world as if it's intelligently designed, or if it's not designed, if it just exists as part of a natural process that started a long time ago, then what are some of the things that you went from thinking that the universe was intelligently designed to understanding that it's not? What are some of the things that convinced you?
Well, one of the things that I wanted to bring up earlier, and I'll bring up this now, one of the things that I've thought back to my earliest memories, and I can't think of a time that I did not support the theory of evolution. The funny thing is I come from a family of creationists. Everybody in my family believes the Earth is 6,000 years old, 6 to 10. Or at least believes that humans have been here for 6 to 10,000 years. But my earliest memories, I never thought that. And I don't know why. I think it's more so that I was very scientific at a young age. I loved science. And that my parents taught me to look at authority figures. And so I did. And hey, who's more of an authority on evolution? My father or a biologist?
Yeah. Well, and there's certainly no doubt. I mean, sometimes religious folks make the argument that evolution is a dogma, but it's just another idea that is on the level of creation ideas, right? Their particular religion has a creation idea, and this is how the universe was, or this is how human beings in particular came to be what they are today. And here comes, this is evolution, which is just another one of those kinds of stories. And they don't realize the difference that, yes, people like you and I could believe evolution to be true because of dogmatic thinking. Well, everybody else thinks it's true, or it makes intuitive sense. I mean, there are all of those qualities to evolution, but it has the added quality of being factually true. It actually fits the facts, all of the facts that we know. Everything that we know about humanity, about life on Earth, all fits the theory of evolution. And not because the theory of evolution isn't is non-specific, say, right? It's just general, right? It's just the theory of evolution says, say, that all animals will change or something like that. Well, duh. It doesn't make silly trivial predictions. It actually makes very specific predictions. It actually says something very specific about how everything alive came to be what it is today. And all of the information we have fits that. And, of course, it can be disproven quite easily. I mean, people have come up with tests to be able to disprove evolution, or at least certain particular aspects of evolutionary theory could be disproven. And like any good scientific explanation, it is tentative to a certain degree. It's like, okay, we go with this theory of evolution. We have this idea, this framework of how life came to be what it is today, and it's still, a lot of it is provisional. I mean, we still haven't filled in all of the gaps in our knowledge about it, and we may find out new things that modify it, but of course not to the degree probably, it would be wishful thinking at best, I think, that the theory of evolution would be overturned completely. I mean, we've just found out too many things. I mean, we know how, for example, horses evolved and whales evolved, and there's no new information that's going to come about that would make us, not understand those things. I like to liken it to the difference between Newtonian physics and Einsteinian physics, right? I mean, in Newton's day, about 400 years ago, he figured out how, for example, the moon revolves around the Earth, right? Or the sun the Earth revolves around the sun. He figured out sort of how things work in how things interact with gravity, right? Then Einstein comes along, and he says, well, Newton, had it right almost all the way, except for in these special circumstances, right? Like the planet Mercury, which is very close to the sun. Time is different. Time runs at a different speed on Mercury than it does on Earth because of Mercury's proximity to the sun's gravity, right? So a lot of these things, it doesn't mean that you can still use Newton's physics to shoot a cannonball and make it land exactly where you want it to land, right? That doesn't change. We can still put a man on the moon using Newton's physics if we wanted to. But Einstein's physics gets us more precise, gets us more detail, and takes us to different extremes. And it's the same thing with evolutionary theory. We have this big, broad picture, right, of evolution, and we've charted evolution in all sorts of different animals, right? And so we know what's happening, but sometimes we just don't know the details of how or when or things like that. Those are the things that are mostly provisional. But evolution, although, to be modest, right, we have to say that it is provisional. I mean, we could find out that we're all brains in a vat, or, some crazy thing, that this is all, evolution was, God was God's plan, right? And he's been sort of, evolving this plan. We could find evidence. We haven't found it yet. We could find evidence for these things. We haven't found it yet, so we shouldn't believe things without evidence, right? But we have, it doesn't mean that evolution, the entire concept of evolution, is going to be flipped on its head necessarily.
Yeah. But the one thing that I have brought up before, and this is extremely unlikely, I'm not saying this is possible, but it is technically, is that we could find out God does really exist. It is the Messianic God. And that he put all of this evidence of evolution to trick us. But then why would I want to worship that God?
Well, right. I mean, there's a million possibilities out there. But let's go with what we know. Let's just go with what we know. And it's a simple idea, and it's an atheistic idea that we just go with what we know. We don't, we might like the idea that there's, gods and demons and angels and all of these other things. That it might be fun to think that, or it might please us somehow. But what we know is that so far there are no such entities, that those things don't play a role. In fact, one of the reasons why evolution is such a hot-button issue with the religious is because it is an explanation about how all living things came to be what they are today that does not require any sort of overarching intelligent design. It just requires natural processes. That's it. Now, that's not to say for our religious friends that their God didn't have something to do with it, maybe. But again, let's go with what we know. Let's not. I mean, we could imagine any number. I mean, why would it have to be a God, for instance, that is fiddling the knobs when it comes to evolution? Why couldn't it be an alien race? Religious people will reject that out of hand. Why? Because there's absolutely no reason to believe that there is an alien race that's fiddling the knobs of evolution. Well, in the same regard, there's no reason to believe that there's a God fiddling the knobs of evolution and tuning it just right.
Another thing that religious people bring up that I've heard a lot is that you're just following Darwin's beliefs, that he came up with this 150 years ago, and that's all you have. Period. That's all you have. Something that was thought of 150 years ago, so why should you still believe it?
Well, we talked about this over and over again. Again, it's very easy to ignore the last 150 years of science, right? I mean, you can just ignore it, and then sure, that makes a lot of sense. But there have been biologists for the last 150 years who have been refining. I mean, the theory of evolution is it's a work in progress. Like I was explaining before, it is not an entire, a theory is as a broad explanation for something, right? Of certain collected facts and proved hypotheses and all these things built into an explanatory framework, but it's not static. It's not, when Darwin first proposed his theory of evolution, or actually his theory of evolution by natural selection, that was his deal, right? There had been evolutionists before him. His grandfather was an evolutionist, right? But they didn't understand one of the major forces, one of the major reasons why over very long periods of time, animals change in certain ways, and that was called natural selection. That's really what Darwin was responsible for bringing to our attention, was this idea of natural selection and how it works. And so, evolution in and of itself, the theory of evolution could involve, for example, aliens or deities. I mean, there's no reason why, if evidence is found that aliens or deities were involved in this process on Earth that we call evolution, this process of biological change over time, then that could be incorporated into the theory. But the specifics, for example, natural selection and sexual selection, were two aspects of evolution that Darwin worked on and wrote books about, and was very keen to explore these ideas. And subsequently, those ideas of Darwin have been fleshed out. Some of them have been proved true, some of them have been proved false, but all of them, just because Darwin said, that doesn't mean anything. So he came up with an idea, and
then we try to falsify it.
Yeah, then we try to falsify it, right. And then we try to see, well, is it true or not? And let me tell you, no scientific theory has probably ever gotten the kind of scrutiny that Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection has gotten. Because there was so much religious pushback, so much philosophical pushback. I mean, we all know there are people who, for the last 150 years have been religious and scientists, and they've wanted to be able to reconcile the two things. And if their religion says one thing, they want their science to say the same thing, and vice versa. And over and over and over again, we found that that test after test, observation after observation has shown that Darwin's theory of natural selection, or evolution by natural selection, is true. That's how things apparently have come to be what they are today.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to bring up a hypothesis, and this is just a hypothesis, means that it could be falsified tomorrow. But one of the hypotheses of abiogenesis is that meteors crashed on Earth with what would eventually become the biological, with very primitive life form now.
Okay.
And this is yet to been proven, but they're looking into this, and proven into the sense of that this is more likely true than not. It's far from that period right now, but
speculation. All speculations have the quality of being equally valid, right? If we're just going to speculate about something, then one speculation is as good as another. God did it is just as good a speculation as aliens did it, right?
Yeah.
At some point.
But the idea of the meteors, there is some ideas that do go together. For one, there's these things called water bears or tardigrades. Have you heard about them?
I've heard the name, but what are they? Can you explain it?
Okay, they're insects that are basically that can survive in very harsh environments, really, really hot, really, really cold, and the vacuum of space.
Okay.
And I believe they're insects. I don't think they're bacteria. And so the idea of it is that this. So the idea of it is that we have this life form that could and we've tested them, and they can survive on a meteor. We could send these things in a meteor. We could do a meteor.
So it's plausible, right? It has a plausibility to it that pure speculation doesn't have, right? It's based on something we know, and so it's more than just a speculation at that point, right?
Yeah.
It's more of an educated guess or a hypothesis.
It doesn't mean it's correct. It just means we have found one line of, hey, wait, if this is this, and we're getting closer to finding answers. We don't know much about abiogenesis. That's one of those things that I tell people I don't accept abiogenesis because the scientists haven't come up with if you ask different scientists in different fields, they have their pet horse. They have their horse in the race. It's not like evolution, that basically if you go ask any scientist that has any...
Well, you do understand, though, that if, for example, if you're talking about the theory of panspermia, right? The idea that life on Earth came from somewhere else. And that idea, I don't think it rests as soundly on the facts, for example, as like, a chemical genesis of life on Earth. And it just pushes the problem back one step. Okay, so life, came to Earth from elsewhere. Well, how did that elsewhere life start out? And it must have started out by some sort of natural process. I say must have because it's the only way that we know how things work. I mean, it's the only knowledge that we have about the universe is about the natural universe. We don't have knowledge. We don't know how some other way could have happened, like a God creator. We don't know how that works. No scientists have been able to uncover how how magic works, how things can be magicked into existence like living things. Nobody's ever found any processes or any way to show how something like that might work. On the other hand, we know a lot about chemistry. We know a lot about how, for example, self-replicating molecules could come to be. And that's really all you need at some point, is you just need the very first self-replicating molecule somewhere that doesn't get immediately obliterated, right? That just needs a little time to be able to replicate itself, and then all of a sudden you started the entire process of life on Earth. Now I say it sounds simple, right? I'm sure that there are chemists and biochemists out there who would probably, say that I'm oversimplifying, but they would probably also recognize the idea that that there's no reason why that process could not have started out on the early Earth. There's no reason why they could think of why it couldn't have happened that way.
Yeah.
And so again, maybe biogenesis happened somewhere else and then it came to Earth. But either way, you just put it back one step. Meanwhile, the competing idea, right, among religious believers is that there is an intelligent creator that created life. Now, some people, what are they? There's different types of creationists, right? There's the young Earth creationists, the old Earth creationists. What are some of the other names for these?
Those are the only two I know off the top of my head.
Yeah. And what's the difference?
Well, the difference between them, and most of these are in Christianity and Islam and religions like that. Obviously, there are different ideas outside of those two religions, but basically the difference between them is one believes in the scientific idea that the Earth is billions of years old, but God did it. God started life on Earth. God guided evolution. And the other one is like, no, the Earth has been around for 6,000 to 10,000 years. All the stars in the sky have been around for 6,000 to 10,000 years. Get over it.
Okay. So even among the religious, there's no there's no consensus as to how life on Earth might have started.
Well, let's say two fairly well-known religious groups. Let's take the Catholic Church and fundamentalist Christians. Okay, now fundamentalist Christians are broken up into other sectors, but those are two big groups, right?
Right. Yeah, they're huge. I think Catholics used to be, up until very recently, the largest denomination in the United States, where we live, right? And then Protestants, obviously, make up the second largest. I mean, they're not a single denomination like Catholics are.
Yeah. So, but
I think Baptists are a Protestant denomination that makes up the second largest group of the religious. You know, if you can divide them up into denominations.
And I think Baptists work for this because the most Baptists I met that actually call themselves that and go to only a Baptist church are young Earth creationists. To where Catholics, if you follow their teachings, you're an old Earth creationist. And so, I mean, the idea of it is they're not unified.
Yeah, just like any speculation. I mean, everything sort of, you can kind of believe what you want to, and it is based on pure speculation, right? Except for, well, I would say the young Earth creationism is based on a kind of wishful thinking. I wouldn't even call it speculation because there's absolutely nothing to support a young Earth. Now, I hear and see videos, and I hear people say that, well, we have proof, look at the Grand Canyon and other things, and these have been debunked, like so thoroughly debunked as to it's laughable. Again, you have to ignore all of the debunking of the ideas of young Earth creationists to buy into this to begin with. So I don't take that at all seriously.
Well, there might be evidences, but there's no evidence that only goes with young Earth creationists. Like, they could bring up something.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
That could support their thing, but geologists can also use the same proof.
Yeah. You have to have exclusive evidence, right? Evidence that points in two directions doesn't narrow you down, right? If the evidence could point in that direction and that direction, I see what you mean. But the Catholics, on the other hand, seem their idea, the old Earth creationism, is at least based on science, right? It's based on knowledge, discovery, things that we've discovered, and it doesn't ignore what we know about the universe. Now, it adds a little bit of wishful thinking on top of it, that you have we see evolution happening, is what the Catholics are saying, essentially, the Catholic hierarchy at least, even though the lay people are pretty ignorant about most of the Catholic lay people that I've talked to are young Earth creationists or are strict creationists, and they don't really understand what the church leaders are telling them about creationists. But the church leaders are saying that we see evolution happening, we see the evidence for it, we can't deny it, but we want God there. We want God involved with this, right? So we just imagine that there's a God fiddling the knobs. And of course, that's not really a scientific. It's not a prediction. It's you can just imagine God fiddling the knobs with everything. I mean, you could just imagine that you're a puppet on a string, and there's a God making you do everything that you do every moment of your life. That you're not really conscious. You're not really doing anything, right? You could imagine all of this stuff, but it's not really. It's based purely on speculation. It's not based on anything.
That's why I like the deist concept slightly better. Like, if there is a God, I think it's most likely, like let's say for a second that God absolutely does exist. I think the deists are probably closest to what God would actually be, to where there could be an agent that started everything. There could be. I mean, that's more plausible than saying that there's some being in the sky that cares about my sex life.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, to go from a deist position to a religious position where, the religion says that you know something about this God's intentions, their biography, their all of these things, that then, again, it's just adding on more speculation and more speculation. That's why we have so many denominations. Because, when an idea is just based on pure speculation, an idea like God is just based on pure speculation, then it could be anything. It could do anything. What would it take? What would it take to make a Baptist believe that the God of Catholicism is true? How would you convert a Baptist into a Catholic? How would that even happen? What test would be required that would convince somebody to change from one, denomination of the same religion to another? Because all the denominations seem to be, to me, as an outsider at least, they just seem to be based on pure speculation and wishful thinking.
Yeah. Now, have you ever heard of the Raelians?
Yeah. Oh, wait, are those guys that killed themselves like years back because they thought that aliens were going to come pick them up? There were aliens in a spaceship on Halley's Comet. I don't
know if that has anything to do with the Raelians, but I do know there are Raelians because somebody once gave me this premise that all atheists are X, Y, and Z, and one of them was all atheists believe in evolution, or believe that the Earth is billions of years old and all that. Because to be an atheist, you have to do that. And Raelians disprove that, because Raelians believe in Adam and Eve, believe in Noah's Ark, and believes in a 6,000 to 10,000 year old Earth. I don't know necessarily where they fall in that category, but they are atheists. They believe it was all done by aliens. So, and this is an actual religion. It's a fringe religion. It's very small, but it actually does exist.
Well, and so was Christianity at one time, right?
Yeah, and so it shows you
Mormonism.
Yeah, but it shows you that atheists are all different shapes and sizes, and that even people that call themselves atheists are not free from. We're not all skeptics, and that's the important distinguishing factor.
That's a good distinction. I like that. All atheists are not skeptics. That's
and let's be very fair. There are Christians that are very good skeptics. They just don't put their skepticism in that one facet of their life.
I just don't think that. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe I just don't know. But I have to believe that a lot of the Christians out there are just like me and grew up just like me, questioning and sort of, they grew up with a presupposition about there being a God, right, and being indoctrinated into this, looking at everything and seeing God involved. I grew up thinking, well, I don't really know, and just being curious, right? But they must be curious about, for example, how God does stuff, right? They must wonder about these things. And I can't believe that they must realize that a lot of what they think about how about their God is really not based on anything other than wishful thinking, but it's a kind of wishful thinking that is based on knowledge of what they know about how the universe works. For example, again, a young Catholic who understands Catholic doctrine might accept that accept evolution, accept theistic evolution according the way the Church does it, that God is fiddling with evolution and making it happen all this time. And it can't be disproven, right? So they sort of select it as their favorite speculation, right? And they go with that. They run with that. And this is my favorite speculation about how it worked. And for example, you probably still have your favorite speculation about how life came to be on Earth, right? And you like the idea of panspermia, right?
Well, I'm not. I don't fall in any of those categories.
Wait. Don't you have an idea about how life came to be on Earth that you prefer?
Well, I would. Okay, yes, I would prefer that aliens actually sent a probe to our planet and seeded it. I would love that.
You prefer that, okay? And I understand that from you. I mean, I get that from you. You just as much said it earlier. Me, I prefer the idea of life forming from self-replicating molecules that were created in hydrothermal vents under the ancient oceans of Earth. A theistic, evolutionist, like say a Catholic, might prefer the idea that there is this intelligent being that is outside of nature that can somehow affect things in nature and created the first life, created the first little bit of spark of life, and then some way or another on Earth, thousands of years ago, maybe the same exact way that I think it happened, in hydrothermal vents, that God, winked and wiggled his nose, and poof, there was the first self-replicating molecule there. And it really comes down to, I really believe that religious people have a preference a lot of times. They just prefer to insert their God into it. You prefer to insert alien civilizations into it. I prefer to stick with purely naturalistic explanations. But what it comes down to is that we don't really know for sure.
And also the thing about this is I'm not inserting that aliens did do it. I'm not going around making YouTube videos to say that aliens did it. One of the reasons why I would prefer it...
Well, you're missing a great opportunity, Mark.
One of the reasons I would prefer it is that would give us the answer to, are there intelligent beings out there? And so instead of us sitting here pondering that thought...
Now, how is that different, though, than a thoughtful religious person, trying to sort of insert their God into it, because they prefer that there be a God, a lawgiver in particular. A lot of people really, they're all about law and order. They really want justice
and
in this world.
Okay, the way that I kind of see it is that, first of all, I would love that to be the case, simply so we don't have this question. I don't think panspermia is... I think it's less likely than your idea. I think your idea is more likely because you are going back. It's just we're going into pure what we would want to be true, because I want aliens to be real. I want them to be real so badly. I want intelligent aliens. I want to be able to go on a voyage and travel new worlds and actually get to meet aliens.
Oh, don't get me on Star Trek. I love Star Trek. Don't let me go there. Okay, but now I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to sound a little, I don't know, a little conceited, maybe. I don't know, but what I like about an Earth, an undersea abiogenesis, is that it has the quality of fitting all of the known facts, all of our knowledge so far. It fits. The idea that a God, to insert a God into that is to insert something which has no foundation at all. The religious have yet to prove that there is a God at all. And then to insert something that is unproved into an idea that is unproved is just it just takes it way out of bounds as far as I'm concerned.
For instance, are unproved.
Right.
I think it's more likely that aliens exist than a god.
Well, yeah.
But
I mean, humans exist. You know, the all life on Earth exists. Why couldn't life somewhere else exist? Right? I mean, obviously, life can exist in this universe on a planet like ours. So the question is, you know, how many other planets are there like ours?
And the answer could sadly be none.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that before I die, and before people say, oh, wait, we won't be able to travel that far. Well, we don't necessarily have to travel. I hope before I die we do prove it. I hope we come up with telescopes.
There are scientists who are figuring that out, you know, that are learning more and more about learning how to detect living beings on other planets, right? We've already detected hundreds of exoplanets. Now the trick is to figure out which ones might have life. And they're working on it. They're getting closer and closer. There are certain things that, you know, biological life here on Earth has changed our atmosphere, right? I mean, oxygen is a product of life on Earth. The oxygen in our atmosphere, for example. There are other chemicals that are, you know, that could be indicative of life on other planets. And so if we could find those same chemical properties on these exoplanets that we've discovered, it could give us, again, a closer and closer clue as to whether there's life on those other planets. Yeah. Then, of course, the trick is getting to them. You know, some of these planets would take, even if we could travel at 1/10 of the speed of light, it might take 100 years, you know, to get word back, you know, from a probe that goes to these planets about whether there is, you know, life as we know it on these planets, at the very least.
The other problem with how we're looking for life on other planets, which this is going to get better over time, is that I ask people a simple question. I'll ask you this question: how many planets do we know that there is life on? That we absolutely know there are no questions.
There's one.
Okay, because a lot of people are like thinking about that, thinking it's a trick question. No, it's not a trick question. One is the correct answer. And so we can only use that one planet as an example and go, okay, so life has to have X, Y, and Z, but life might not need X, Y, or Z. We could literally have the worst planet for life. Like, we could absolutely have the worst, like, planet Earth could be the worst planet to have life out of all the planets that have life. Like, if you took all the planets that have life, Earth could theoretically be the worst. We don't know.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? That doesn't seem to ring true just by the fact that we have, 8 planets.
Well, I mean,
sorry, Pluto.
Pluto,
but you're not included here. But we have 8 planets in our solar system, and only one of them has life. And so we have 7 examples of planets that are not good for life.
Well, not necessarily, because Venus and Mars might have been suitable at one time for life. That's still up in the air.
Okay.
But as of right now, they don't have life. We're pretty sure on that. But I'm saying that out of all the planets that can, let's say that we because other than Mercury, the 4 other planets you're talking about are a certain type of planet, right? They all fall in the same category, don't they?
What are you getting at? I don't understand.
That they're all gas giants. That they're all.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
And so the point of it is that we.
You named Uranus, right? Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter. Those are the 3 gas giants in our solar system, right?
Oh. Okay. What's the 8th planet? The one that we haven't named yet.
Let's see. We've got. Oh no. There's. Let's see. Mercury is a rocky planet. Venus has an atmosphere. It's cloudy.
It is the planet closest to Earth. It is in an habitable zone. It's really bizarre because It's hotter than Mercury,
Right.
but for every other reason, it could have life.
Right.
Like, we should have Venus cousins. I should be able to go to Venus on vacation and hang out with whatever they're called.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it didn't happen. And trust me, scientists are on that. They're gonna figure it out. They're absolutely gonna have an answer.
And then Mars has a very thin atmosphere. It's very rocky. Then you have Jupiter, Saturn, and then Uranus. Right? That's it.
There was one more.
What's the other one? What?
I don't know.
What planet am I missing? We're just forgetting a planet, aren't we? We just lost a planet.
And you're gonna be like, duh, when I
Where
get it.
did I put that planet anyway? Well, yeah, Pluto isn't a planet anymore. Changed the name. It's too small. I think it's a planetoid now. That's what they're calling it. As if, adding OID at the end of it makes it any different, but, whatever. And I think Pluto even has a satellite or two. How about that?
Yeah, it does. Neptune.
Neptune. There we go. Neptune. And Neptune, I forgot. Is Neptune doesn't have clouds, does it? It doesn't have an atmosphere. Is it a rocky planet? I forgot.
Neptune. I believe it is a gas giant.
There we go. Smith 4.
Yeah. So the point I'm making here is the concept of we have examples of two types of planets for the most part, and we might find a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, obviously a third and a fourth. And once we start to get these other numbers, once we start to figure out all the different types of planets, we could find out that life is better on a different type of planet. That's what I'm saying.
So I want to again bring it back to
this is pure speculation.
Atheism and religion, though. I wonder how it seems to be a sort of a stereotypical atheist pastime to speculate about life on other planets and to talk about solar systems and space and all this other stuff. When theists, when they talk about these things, how do you talk about that? About the possibility on life on another planet, say, which, again, atheists love to talk about this stuff. Do they just sort of poo-poo it and say, God made Earth, humans are God's special creation, and this is our domain, and this is it, and so to speculate about other planets and stuff, that's ridiculous. Let's change the subject. I mean, how do they approach this?
Obviously, like everything else, it depends on the theist you're talking to. One of my fundamentals friends says that it's not in the Bible, doesn't exist. Which I'm so hoping that we discover life on another planet.
Really, because, weirdest thing happened to me the other day. We're not usually in the flight path of commercial jets, but the other day a commercial jet was just maybe 500 feet above our house flying over. And, of course, I've never seen anything about jets, like passenger planes, in the Bible. So I'm just wondering how I should approach that experience that I had. Like, maybe that wasn't a passenger jet. Maybe your friend is right, that if it wasn't in the Bible, therefore it doesn't exist. And maybe it was
angels. It was angels.
Maybe it was an angel. It was shiny. I mean, it had glowy lights and stuff. It was loud. I mean, it could have been. Who knows? I don't know. What are angels like? Maybe your friend can tell us what an angel is like. Actually, that gives us a nice segue to the next part of the next topic we wanted to talk to. We didn't really do intelligent design or unintelligent design justice. We're going to move on.
Well, we did it well enough. We wanted
to talk about the soul, right? The idea of a soul, which kind of relates to intelligent design in a little bit, in a bit. But one of the interesting ideas of humanity is the soul, and it's been incorporated into many different religions, this idea that human beings have something that we call a soul, and the popular religions today, and what is it? Something like over 90% of Americans, religious or not, think that they have a soul. And I just, the whole thing about the plane just reminded me, if it's not an airplane, what is it? And the whole thing about the soul kind of, I don't know why, but it seems related. And one of the questions that I'd love to ask a religious believer is, how do you say that we have a soul, right? The assumption being the word a, we have a soul. And the assumption being that we only have one. And I was reading the other day that there are other religions where people believe that we have more than one soul, that we have multiple souls. And so the question I'd like to ask that religious believer, especially the Christians, who, it's part of their doctrine that we have a soul, how do you know we only have one? Like, how do you count how many souls you have? What's the process? Walk me through the process of counting a person's soul or souls.
Well, and that goes back to my question of my answer about the soul is why do I believe or not believe in a soul? Is simply that there is no evidence for a soul. I know that back when I did believe in a soul, when I was still an atheist. I believed it was basically something that contained, more so as a report card, kind of.
Okay.
It was kind of like every time we're reborn, the cosmic beings can look at it and go, we did X, Y, and Z. And it's more so what we've done and who we are. It's we don't remember our past lives, but our soul does. Our soul has all that information in it. Now, obviously, that's more reincarnation and not a very Christian idea. I don't ever remember believing in a soul when I was a Christian. I know I did, but I just don't remember what I thought a soul was. And
yeah.
So I can't answer that question. I don't believe in a soul because there's no evidence for a soul.
Well, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, you can just completely stop. I think you can just completely stop someone in their tracks who claims that souls exist by asking them, well, how many do you have? And as soon as they give you a number, I have 1, 5, I have 20 souls, how did you come up with that?
Yeah. Well,
I think that that pretty much just ends the debate right there. There's no okay, but it does. There's still something problematic though, right? And that is the idea that you are who you are. Where does you come from? And so I think that, again, getting back to like what we were saying earlier about at least what I think about how religious people think, is that they're probably very thoughtful. They're probably curious about things like that. And when the question of who am I, what is me, right? What is the essential me that I think of as me? What is it that's thinking, right? When I think about me, they want to believe in this sort of this magical part of themselves that is a part of a god. And again, it's just speculation, and there's so little science to tell us who you are, right? What you are, how you think, what is thinking when you think. That it seems to me like maybe it's kind of it's just a preference. It's like, okay, maybe they don't really believe that they have a soul, but they prefer to think of themselves as a soul.
And I think one of the things that is more so a kind of a disproof of a single soul is that people will say a soul is them, and what makes them who they are. But then there are experiments. I don't know if you're familiar with this, where what they'll do is they'll actually take one person and they'll tamper around with their brain to where that person is now two people. Like one half of the brain is one person, the other half of the brain is another person, and in some cases they're a theist and an atheist, and other things like that. And one can control the hands, while the other one can control vocal, and they can communicate who they are. And so, if we are who we are because of our soul, then how can that be true? How can you have one person that's literally two people at the same time?
Yeah, or the whole idea of a disembodied soul doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, because like you said, I mean, everything. The only way that we can communicate with another person is through some sort of physical medium, right? We can use sign language. We can make sounds. We can write things, right? So we use our eyes. We can use Braille, right? We can communicate from one person to another. But when you take out the physical body and you are a soul, you are an island. How would you possibly communicate with anybody? It reminds me of a movie. There's a black and white movie that was made a couple decades ago about a soldier who was, I think it was World War I, and he was in a gas attack and a shelling, and he had no arms, no legs, no eyes, no mouth. He was pretty much just a stump. And the entire movie takes place in this room in a hospital that they've set aside for him. And he's just laying there on a table. And you can hear his thoughts, right? He can talk to you. He's talking to us in the audience, right? And thinking. And there's one nurse that keeps coming and taking care of him. And he wants so badly to communicate with her. She's his only contact with any other intelligent being. I mean, he's living entirely in his head. And eventually, she figures out, the nurse does, how to communicate with him. She takes a sponge and she dips it in some water, and then she writes letters on his chest. And then she can ask him yes or no questions, and he can thump his head. He still has control over his neck, and he can thump his head on his pillow once for yes, twice for no. And they end up being able to communicate that way. And it's obviously it's a sad movie, right? And it's very moving. I wish I could remember the name of it. It's a beautiful movie. It's very touching and moving and very intense too. But I think of that situation. I think of that like, what if you were a disembodied soul, and you didn't even have the ability, you couldn't write letters using a wet sponge. You couldn't tap your head. You wouldn't have any way to communicate. It would be a kind of hell. You'd be completely isolated, right? We're social animals. We need to communicate. If we're left alone for any considerable length of time, we go crazy, and often we kill ourselves.
Well, I mean, have you ever heard of the show Charmed?
Yeah. I don't remember it, but I've heard of it.
Okay. Well, the concept they used is not original, but it's just the thing that I'm thinking of right now that used this. Where whenever somebody would die but not be permanently dead, they would go into a world that was like ours, but it was like dimmer. Like turn down, like when you're on your TV, turn down the color setting so it's darker, and that would be our world. And so anybody that is in the same state as them can connect and can relate and can talk to each other, but it's very hard in this world, it's very hard for people to communicate with people that are in the other plane of existence. Like, it's two different planes. I'm sharing a thin line. But
then, hold on. Now you're getting, though, into a very... You're touching on the idea of a duality, right? So far, we haven't really touched on that. But the idea that you are a dual person, you are a soul and a physical being. But if your soul is in your body, Why doesn't your soul have access to this soul world already?
I have. See,
I mean, if the soul still exists in the natural world that we all live in, right? It's somehow attached to you, your body. What is it? What's different about your soul that all of a sudden it has access to this hypothetical soul world? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
What are the properties that would make it different?
It's great in fantasy, and yet again, a lot of these concepts are great in fantasy. That's why I love fantasy and sci-fi, because we can come up with these concepts that just don't make any sense.
Well, Hollywood relies on people just not asking questions. I mean, the willful suspension of disbelief is stock and trade. I mean, that's pretty much everything. Every movie or science fiction or fantasy book or TV show relies on. It relies on us not asking these difficult questions, and it relies on our cultural assumptions, right? That things like, oh, well, the soul leaves the body, it goes into a soul world. What was it doing in the body? What's the difference?
It can also explore concepts and ideas like that, to where we can say, okay, what if the soul really did exist? What would the properties of soul be?
Yeah. Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, the old question is where does the soul reside? People have asked that for thousands of years. If ever since the idea of souls came to us from the ancient Greeks, as far as we know, where does the soul reside, if there is such a thing? And modern medicine over the last 200 years has tried to tackle that problem. Actually, people have seriously tried to figure out where in the human body a soul might reside. And after hundreds of years of looking and never finding it, today contemporary soul believers just chalk it up to it's something ethereal. It's not a part of our natural world necessarily. That it's just, it's a spirit. I mean, they use all sorts of words that to sort of skirt the issue of nobody's ever found one.
Yeah.
So we're going to use a word like spirit to describe how nobody's found one, but it's still there.
And a lot of these words don't really have a true definition. And I'm going to bring this up quickly because this made more sense in our first segment. Is the word kind? Like if you ask a Christian what a kind is, they'll give you 8 different things to explain a kind, and then it will basically you can't get it down. Like, what does a kind mean?
A kind is a thing after its own kind. How's that?
Well, and I'll be very quick on this. I was watching a video from this really cool person, King Crocodile. Go check him out. And he was tackling evolution versus God. And one of the he had actually did a short video where he actually was there where he was actually at the school that Ray Comfort was handing out evolution versus God, and he had a short conversation with him and asked him what a kind is, and he said that bacteria gives under its own kind. He said wolves and dogs. He said Rottweilers and Chihuahuas. I might be wrong about the types of dogs, but same concept.
He gave some examples, right?
Yeah, and the person made a really good example. Well, if we're going to say bacteria, then you have all of the animal. You have like every single life form in that category because bacteria is in everything. And so, but then if you have Chihuahuas and Rottweilers, well, that's a subcategory. So like it's like his definition makes no sense. Like he can't define the thing.
Right.
He can give examples, but the examples don't get us any closer to what they are. It's
well,
like
that's the difference between a real scientist and an idiot.
Well, I'm actually starting to believe that Ray Comfort's not an idiot. I'm starting to believe that he's actually very, very intelligent, and he doesn't believe he doesn't believe the shit that he says. It's just he knows it makes him money because he's too.
Well, he probably became an atheist a long time ago. But the thing is that and that's not a slam on him. That's a slam on atheists. I mean, that there are atheists out there that would take advantage of religious believers. That's not cool at all.
No, it's not cool. And the idea of it is the whole point of it is that's why it's dangerous, because these believers could be believing in somebody who is completely bullshitting them.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the nursery rhyme kind of logic that a lot of the famous creationists like Kent Hovind and Ken Ham and people like that, all these guys I mean, it really is. It's simple. It's like nursery rhyme logic and science, and it's only an adult who is retarded would be entertained by stuff like that at some point. You have to say. I mean, I hate to be cruel and call names and stuff, but really, when you watch these people's videos on the internet, right? The greatest resource for finding out information, and you don't go and look at the first thing you should do when you listen to an Eric Hovind video on the internet is go, click in the little Google bar that you've got on your browser and write, debunking Eric Hovind. That's all you have to do, right? 3 words, and boom, you'll get thousands of replies, and you just have to look at the top 10. I mean, Google does a good job of giving you the top 10 ways that Eric Hovind is debunked, or whoever it is, debunking this, debunking that.
And
that's all you have to do.
Actual PhDs, because Kent Hovind doesn't have a real one. I'm sorry, people who believe he does. He doesn't.
Yeah, well, he's a graduate of the prison system. But whatever the case, the thing is that there's really no excuse. I mean, I know I'm being harsh sometimes when I call people idiots or morons or things like that. I mean, it's not a nice thing to say, but if the shoe fits, I mean, at some point you have to take responsibility for being bamboozled. At some point, okay, there are people out there who are giving you plausible reasons that are fitting your wishful thinking, and I sympathize with that. But at some point, the first time somebody like me comes along and tells you there's a reason maybe not to believe these people and not to believe these silly ideas, then it is your responsibility from that time forward. You talk about your fundamentalist friend who I've had the misfortune of talking to. And again, he, through yourself and my conversations, and I'm sure other people's conversations, he's heard all sorts of reasons, and he's pretty typical, I'm sure, of a lot of religious believers, that he's heard the reasons why what he's saying is probably not correct. And he stops right there and ignores it. And he doesn't take his responsibility, right? He's being irresponsible by not actually going and looking at these things critically at that point. I mean, I can forgive anybody for having a knee-jerk, like or dislike of an idea, based on their worldview, based on other stuff. That's cool. But the moment that somebody else comes along and points out how it might be flawed, from that point forward, it's your responsibility. And if you don't take that responsibility to look into why your ideas might be wrong, then you're a moron and you're an idiot, and you deserve that. You deserve that name calling.
Yeah. Now, bringing him up, and this will segue into our final segment, because I think we tackled the soul pretty good, because there's really nothing to tackle.
Yeah. I have 10 souls, and 3 of them are disembodied right now. They're just like, they're playing catch in the backyard.
I have half a soul, so I'm not a yeah. Not a very full.
Which half? Which half of the soul do you have? Okay, anyway, moving on.
Yeah. My fundamentalist friend has told me on many accounts that I don't have any morals.
Well, okay. I mean, we all know you pretty well, Mark. What are you trying to say?
That apparently eating babies and worshipping many devils is not moral. I didn't know that.
Why didn't somebody tell you sooner? Oh, the babies they could have saved. So, but the delicious meals you would have had to forego. Yeah. May I vouch for you? May I do a little gentle stroking of ego, and to say that you are, I think, one of the most at least empathetic people that I know, and probably one of the most moral people that I know, and morally good, I should say, morally good. And I say that because you're very thoughtful and considerate of others, right? You consider, I mean, even like things that I would never consider about treating other people, things that might even consider minor issues or trivial issues with regard to treating other people a certain way. You take these things really to heart. I mean, you really are. I think a very moral person in that sense, at least.
Yeah. Well, let's get into what morality is. What is morality? And is it something that a god deems? Because the concept of...
I like the way you said that. God?
Yeah.
God? What would God say?
See, the concept that God deems morality is not... Okay, the two types of moralities, I get these words mixed up. There is subjective and objective. And they try to say that objective morality exists because God does it. Well, that makes no sense on any level, because what if God told you that for instance, raping babies was the most moral thing? 11th commandment, rape babies. Okay, technically there's more than 10 commandments, but a brand new main commandment, the 11th commandment, rape.
The fact that you even think about things like that, I'm taking you off my list of the most moral people that I know. But go ahead, continue, please.
Okay. Okay. Well, the concept of it is then they would have to justify why that is now moral, where I can say that I can... And he actually... Okay, and not to bring him up so much, but he actually tried to tell me that my idea of why I don't think raping babies is moral isn't very good, because I told him...
your fundy friend.
Yeah, right? That okay. I'm harming somebody, that you're harming somebody, and he says, well, there's a certain age where people will remember things, so technically your example doesn't work, because if you do it at young enough, they won't remember, so there's no harm, and it's like, that's not actually how reality works.
That's scary. That's scary. I tell you what, you want to be scared, you want to be frightened about your fellow man. Listen to religious fundamentalists explain morality and moral thinking, their moral thinking to you, and you'll be frightened out of your wits. Like lock your doors, people, if you live next to a religious fundy, because they can justify the most heinous acts. But okay, so yeah, I mean, morality. What's right? What's wrong? How do we decide? How do you figure out what's right and what's wrong? And certainly, we all agree. I think everyone at least assumes that we have individual morality, that each of us has the ability to make moral choices. So that's good, right? So we have some common ground there. But yeah, this idea of an objective, well, I wouldn't say an objective, an absolute morality, I think is a better term, right? That there is an absolute moral dictator right, whose name is God, and he, this God being can tell us what's right and wrong, and that we, as moral actors, can be moral simply by just following directions. Simply by not even thinking and just saying, God said this is good, I'm going to do it, and that must be moral.
Yeah. And I love using this argument with Christians, because you'll say, what if God told you to kill all the Chinese people in America? And then they said, well, my God wouldn't tell me to do that. Well, no,
right.
You can't use that answer. What if your God did?
Well, hold on now. God is a morally perfect being, right? To be perfect, perfection requires that you be morally perfect.
Yes.
So why would a God tell you to do something horrible like that?
And flooding the entire earth and only leaving 8 people alive and killing all the little kittens. Remember, the kittens died. Moral. I mean, okay, maybe only humans were wicked and evil, but were the kittens wicked and evil?
Yeah, but they don't have souls. Let's not go down that path.
Okay, my cat has a soul. My cat actually has 5 souls, okay? They're all dark and dimmy, but they're there.
Yeah, we don't want to. Let's get away from that part of the. I mean, yeah, we can definitely digress in any number of directions, but that's one that.
That was a joke.
We already talked about souls a little earlier, and we all know that cats don't have any souls. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but the point of it is that so. What do you deem moral? I mean, the Bible talks about killing a village, and it says don't kill, but it should have had what do you call that, where you have don't do X except in, what's that called? Is it an asterisk?
Huh? What? Huh?
The
little star thing, yeah.
Yeah, so the Bible should have said, do not kill, asterisk. Unless God tells you to do so, then it is the moral thing to do, because God tells people to kill all the time.
Well, in the books, if you watch the movie, though, it's not quite like that. But, so what is right and where, I guess, at some point, you have to admit that all an individual has is subjective morality. That's it. Okay? When the religious person tells me that, God is a perfect moral being and he can provide, I don't mean to be sexist when I say he, I'm just doing it for simplicity's sake. So God, she, I don't care, whatever, it. When God says that something is morally good, then it is morally good. They're making a value judgment. They're making a moral judgment about God, aren't they?
Yes.
I mean, and so ultimately it has to come down to a subjective judgment. Well, God says, I'm making a judgment as a religious person who believes in a morally perfect God, that what God says, what God commands to be moral is moral. Therefore, it is. Again, that is a subjective judgment. I mean, ultimately, we're all stuck with our own subjective judgments about right and wrong. Now, the problem comes when people do things that they otherwise know is wrong, but they believe that there's a God telling them to do it, and that somehow justifies it and makes it right.
Yeah.
Even though they know somehow in their soul that it's wrong, then that's really where the trouble comes in. Your fundamentalist friend is pretty typical of that. With the people they wouldn't remember, or whatever. They've got all these convoluted answers to justify the most heinous acts. We as atheists, with a secular morality, right, and an understanding that at the individual level all morality is subjective.
Yeah.
We don't have to struggle with that. Now, a lot of the religious will argue that, well, okay, then that makes you a moral relativist. Not really, because there is a caveat to that. I mean, there's an exception to that, and that is the idea that we all live in communities. We're social beings, and there is an objective morality that we can get to, right? Just like we can get to objective, and I'm using objective in the same sense that we would use it in science. Objective, in other words, it's something that would be the same for multiple observers. Okay?
Yeah.
That some conditions, some moral sentiments that are the same for anyone who would observe it. And so we can say things like, for example, killing someone's life out of pure malice, taking someone's life out of pure malice, is morally wrong, right? For several reasons. We all get angry sometimes, and we don't want. So we understand what it's like to be angry at somebody and to wish harm upon somebody because we're angry at them. But would we want other people, other moral actors, to do the same thing to us, to do that to us? Would we feel that they're justified just because they're angry to do us harm or kill us just because they're angry? We might feel sometimes, in the heat of passion, that we're justified to do that, but we know subjectively and objectively, in other words, we get a group of people together and say, you know what? It's not okay for everybody here to just hurt everybody else because they're angry. That wouldn't be something that we could all agree is a moral way, is a right way to behave. I could go on.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I do want to mention really quickly is how I've come up with my answer of how I deem my morality, and it's a concept I've heard from other people, but I've bridged it together to do it. But the concept is that I want to live in a world where no matter who I am, sex, race, religion, and where I live, I want to, no matter what those factors are, I want to live in a world that I can be happy to live in. And so that means that I have to make the world best for everybody, theoretically, to make that true. It means that I have to think about, well, if I do X, well, that might benefit me and it might benefit my group.
Right. Well, fairness and equality are principles that relate to morality.
Yeah.
They're fundamental features of a moral system. A moral system has fairness, which is pretty much paramount. It's tantamount. To equality. And so I can hear when religious people hear about the secular morality of atheists, they often their mind jumps to Nazi Germany, where collectively everybody condemned the Jews, and there were heinous things that were done in the name of their collective morality. 1930s and 1940s Germany. But what we're saying is that those people didn't take into account fairness and equality. The fairness and equality that, again, we all want also needs to be applied to, well, in their example, Jews. They ignored that. It is not an objective morality in that sense. That when people, just because a society gets together and say something like, whatever, we all agree, like in the United States, just 150 years ago, everybody in the U.S. sort of agreed. I mean, granted, there were agreed as much as any country like the United States agrees, where everybody agrees on anything. But we agreed it was law, it was codified into law, it was our culture, that slavery, that owning another human being was okay. Now, again, that ignores, the subjective reality of certain people, and that is not fair, and that is not equal, and that is not objective. That is not an objective morality. That is it's just wrong, right? It's ignoring certain people,
but if you have
certain situations.
Text, but if you have a religious text that says that is moral, which the Bible does, and a lot of the people that said, well, a lot of people that were justifying slavery would bring up their Bible and say, my Bible says I can own a slave.
Sure.
So you get away with me and my slave. And
well, again, it's an example of religious morality. Again, it's codified. It's been there for thousands of years, because that's the way the people who wrote those scriptures thought. And we've made some moral progress since then. We have human beings, humanity, collectively has decided in almost everywhere on the earth that owning another human being is wrong. We've figured that out. That other people are not to be treated as property. And so again, but if you rely, your morality relies on the writings of ancient peoples who didn't come to that conclusion yet, then, you're pretty much screwed. And you have an immoral moral framework.
Yeah. But if you ask a religious person who does believe in the Bible today, they'll tell you that it was indentured servitude.
Well, yeah, I mean, I hear all sorts of crazy ideas. Yeah, and slavery in America. I've even heard that it was just indentured servitude. But then, I mean, you have to, you have to ignore what we know about how it worked. And you have to only people who want slaves, who would like there to continue to be slavery, could say that. Right?
Yeah.
When a person says, well, that was just indentured servitude, or it wasn't as bad as you thought because, it's the same as it is today, except it just had a different name, right? Instead of going to the factory and putting in your hours or having a contract, you were just called a slave. And, it's the same thing. People who say that are people who want slavery back.
Yeah.
Because if they don't want slavery back, then they understand that it wasn't the same. And nobody who says that, I think, really wants slavery back. They just say that because they want to make an excuse for something they know is wrong.
Yeah. But,
did we go too far afield?
No. But the fact is, there's still people in America that want slavery back.
Sure.
And
I say they should be slaves. They should enslave themselves. Have fun with that.
And
I have too much respect for other human beings to play along with their fantasy and to allow them to be slaves. But maybe they can find one of their friends who also wants slavery back, and they can sort of play with each other. One of them could be the slave, one of them could be the slave owner.
But a lot of these people that want to do this want to do it through economical means, which has been done before, which makes it where you are so poor that the only way you can survive is that if you work for X. But to work for X, you have to live in his compound, you have to obey by his rules, and you have to agree to his salary, which is far below what you should get. And that's slavery. I'm sorry. There's no two ways around it. That is a form of slavery.
I don't know. I don't know if I mean, I kind of see where you're coming from, but I don't know if I agree. I think it cheapens the word slavery to call it that, because really being owned, being a piece of property owned by somebody else, is a different proposition than, for example, making subsistence wages or less than subsistence wages. And
but being forced...
for example, let me give you an example. I mean, somebody who works, a clerk at the dollar store probably doesn't make a lot of money, but they are free. They can choose where they live. Now, granted, by free, I mean free in the broad sense, right? I mean, they can't choose to live in a mansion, right? But, I mean, they have choices of what they can, they do have choices.
But what I'm saying is...
They have more choices than a slave. A slave is told where they will live, what they will do. I mean, their body is owned by somebody else. And it's just not the same thing.
But what I'm talking about is having a system in which people are poor and that the only way to make a living is to live in a compound or live in a house owned by this guy, eat the food he gives you. In the concept of...
Well, it could be more and more slave-like, certainly, at some point. It converges upon slavery, yes.
Yeah,
at some point.
You are still free to leave and go find another so-called master, but you're not free in the sense of that you have to live under his rule. You have to live under...
We're talking science fiction, though. I mean, right now, a person who is a slave a person who is a low-wage worker can choose all sorts of things for themselves.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, there are people in America that want that form of slavery. They want slavery through economical means, forcing people to basically to cut down the system to where they have all the money and they deem, and the people who don't have money have to work for these people.
There's only a tiny minority of people who would ever want that. And of that tiny minority of people, there's an even tinier minority who have the means to come anywhere close to something like that in their particular community. So I don't know. I just don't get me wrong. Social and economic justice is important to me, and having living in a country where people often don't have those things is very troubling. But I wouldn't. I don't know. It cheapens slavery, and it cheapens the situation of people who have below subsistence incomes to compare the two, maybe.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. But I'm just saying that there are people, and those people tend to be religious people that think like that, from what I know.
Well, yeah, if you think there's a natural order, I mean, God is the ultimate dictator and the ultimate slave master, and, people like Christians call themselves lambs of the Lord, and you know what happens to lambs right around dinner time? They consider themselves to be slaves to this, powerful thing. They think that's okay somehow. I mean, even a benevolent despot is still not, it's still a dictator. It doesn't matter. We should want to be free of something like that. If there was a deity who just, wanted to make our lives, smell like roses, we still want the freedom to choose for ourselves, to make our own way. How the people who accept God, I call it, Christopher Hitchens called it the totalitarian instinct. They have the people who would want it, who but a slave would want there to be a God.
Yeah,
who does?
I mean. But if you look at and tell me if you know these names, if you look at two sets of very, very rich people, billionaires, Warren Buffett and one of the Koch brothers, they're very different. Warren Buffett's an agnostic. The Koch brothers are Christians, and so it gives them glasses to look at how things are, to where Warren Buffett comes up with his own concepts, and he's a Democrat. Koch brothers are very, very Republican. So it's the idea is that you get into these concepts when you believe in God that I don't think are very moral.
I don't think so either. And yeah. So what are you going to do? Except do what we do and try to talk about this and try to bring these things, these issues, to the front of people's minds and have them consider these ideas a little more thoroughly. I think the only reason why, well, I shouldn't say that. One of the important reasons why religious thinking exists is because it doesn't get the scrutiny that other ideas might get. Political ideas, especially in America, right? We've made politics into a kind of religion. We're able to, we're conservatives or we're liberals or whatever. We belong to a certain way of thinking, and we debate with each other. It's considered to be, public debate of political ideas is considered to be a public good. And then contrast that with the religion of the supernatural religions. And those in particular, specifically have commandments telling people to not think about other religions or other ways of thinking. And we need to get past that. I mean, if we want to get to any kind of a truth, we need to be willing to consider alternatives.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, I do agree. I mean, and this whole politics thing of being a liberal or a conservative, well, I'm a liberal of liberals. I make liberals look conservative. And so calling me a liberal is kind of not right in that concept.
How about if I call you a lefty?
Well, I'm so left that if there was a category beyond left, I'd be in that category. I mean...
Well, okay. So on that note, how are we doing? Have we touched all the subjects? So let's see. We started out with unintelligent design.
Yes.
Sort of. Talked a little bit about the soul. Talked about morality a little bit. I would love to hear from maybe some religious folks who might be listening to this. We have several viewers. You know who you are, Grandma, Grandpa. Maybe you'd be willing to, sort of point out some of the areas, some of the topics, some of the things, some of the ideas that we discussed that you don't agree with, that maybe we didn't do justice to. So I'd love to hear from people like that. I heard you got somebody posted something the other day.
Yes.
What was that about?
One of our friends actually shared our video. I haven't gotten permission to say his name, so I won't. But yeah, one of our friends, a mutual friend of ours, actually shared our video on Google Plus and all that. He liked it, and he said he listened to it in the car, so we have one listener.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Grandma, for listening. That's the one listener, right?
Yeah. Yeah, both of our... we both have the same grandmother, right? Yeah. But yeah, I mean... Yes, but if you do listen to this podcast and you do disagree with us, please leave a comment below. If you want to say something to Tonto, I'll make sure he gets it.
It'll get to me somehow.
Yeah.
Pony Express, somehow.
It will get to him magically because obviously science doesn't work, so we can't expect this fangle-dangle... can't expect to get it through email, right?
Yeah, and you know what I don't want to hear? I don't want to hear how somebody agrees with us. I don't want to hear that. If you agree with anything that we've said, just keep it to yourself, okay?
Yeah. Nobody
Nobody wants to hear that. We want to hear disagreements. I like I like hearing how people disagree. And I like judging their disagreements. I like saying, you know what? This person has a good point, and maybe I need to revise something about my thinking on this particular topic. Or, more typically, not to, again, not to sound conceited or like, that I'm all that, but more often than not, I like to judge, when people say something and I can judge that it's stupid, it's idiotic, it's completely ill-conceived, and they, just like the people who agree with me, they should just keep it to themselves.
Yes.
What I'd like to hear is well-reasoned disagreement. I'd like to hear somebody, not rely on bad reasons or no reasons, but like give me a good reason. Something. Look at what I'm saying from my point of view. Somebody else look at it from my point of view and be charitable and say, well, I know what you were trying to say here, maybe, or I know what you intended, and then say, well, but here's why it's wrong, right? I know what you meant, right? But this is what you were saying, and this is why it's wrong. I'd rather hear something like that than to hear something, for example, a lot of the time I hear criticism of my atheist ideas that is, it's just stupid. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, these people know that I'm an atheist, otherwise they wouldn't be making these arguments, and yet they rely on, telling me I'm wrong because, the Bible says so. Now, what is it that you think would make an atheist care what the Bible says? You got to dig a little deeper. I mean, maybe the Bible does say something that's important, right? But you got to give a reason why. You got to dig a little deeper than that. Why is it that what the Bible says is important, and here's why it's important? Go a little deeper.
It's like one of my favorite passages that I hear theists actually kind of like ring off to me. The fool knows in his heart there is no God.
Yeah.
And they try to say that.
I love the way I whenever anybody says that to me, and that's quoted often, right, to atheists. Atheists get that from people who are somewhat knowledgeable of the Bible. They'll quote that. They'll say, the atheist, or what? Say it again.
The atheist knows.
The fool knows
in his heart.
Yeah.
There is no.
Yeah, and I always say, and the smart person says it out loud to everybody. Right? The fool just keeps it in his heart. Smart people say it out loud.
Yeah. Yet again, it's the concept of the heart. Yeah, my heart doesn't know anything. My heart pumps with blood.
Yeah. Well, we could look at it literally. But that's what I'm talking about, being charitable, right? I mean, we should, when we criticize other people, if we want to do it effectively, we need to be charitable. We need to say, well, okay, they probably didn't mean that literally. The fool knows in his heart that there is no God. What they mean is that somehow, people who are atheists have an instinct that tells them that there is a God, and that they're foolish for not accepting that, for not accepting what they really feel and all that. And of course, that's just not true. I think we can make the case that it's foolish to believe anything on bad evidence, and God belief is based on bad evidence. Now, we could think of all sorts of other things. If we want to, we want to not, we want to make this a universal idea, right? So, we could all agree on certain things that we wouldn't believe on bad evidence, right? And that it's foolish to believe them. There is nothing that we can think of, again, in general, that it is not foolish to believe on bad evidence.
Perhaps.
Right? Now, we apply that to God, now all of a sudden, some religious folks just shut down. They don't want to apply that rule universally, right? But we have to. And again, that's what we atheists do. So anyway.
But on that note, this was the Epic Atheist.
And Tonto.
And it looks like we'll both be seeing you pretty soon in a future podcast.
So stay tuned.
Yes.
We're going to talk about, eventually we're going to get around to talking about something interesting. So just trust us.
And I am Epic, and so are you.